On this episode of Doing the Most, as we prepare for the influx of green beer and mead recipes that are going to flood YouTube, we decided to make a traditional Irish mead. Details on traditional Irish mead are fairly sparse on the internet, but I did dig up this recipe that includes elderflowers, heather tips, and barley. I converted the recipe to a 1-gallon recipe, and I tried to maintain some of the seemingly doing the most aspects. This recipe includes a mash, a boil, and essentially dry hopping with these herbs. So it's kind of a lot, but in the interest of maintaining the integrity of traditional Irish brews, I decided to follow instructions. This 1-gallon recipe will differ slightly from what I showed you. We're going to use 2 pounds of raw honey, a half a pound of light liquid malt extract, 2 ounces of heather tips, and a third of a cup of elderflower. I'm going to ferment this with D47 yeast. The process begins with bringing up some spring water to about 150 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And while that water is coming up to temperature, we're going to measure out our ingredients. I'm using a 1/3 cup measure here to dig into the bag of elderflowers. And then I'm going to split that into 1/3 cups in these small ramekins here. I'd never seen, smelled, or tasted elderflowers before. They were kind of a savory spice, something that might be good on chicken or fish. I was kind of interested by that and a little anxious about how that was going to come out in a fermented mead product, but I am open to the possibilities. So we are splitting the entire 2-ounce bag of heather tips into thirds. And then 1/3 of that is going to go into the hot water and steep for about a half an hour. As that's happening, I'm going to put half of our elderflowers and another 1/3 of our heather tips into the fermentation vessel. And then add our 2 pounds of raw honey. In the original recipe, it calls for a boil with the honey in it. I didn't want to obliterate the delicate aromas and compounds in the honey, so I chose to keep the honey separate from the hot liquor. This became cloudy very quickly with all the herbs and herb dust in there. So I got my kitchen scale out and tared it, and I'm going to pour out half a pound of malt extract, and I almost nailed it. It was just a little bit over 8 ounces. The original recipe seemingly calls for just malted barley. I wanted to forgo that since I had liquid malt extract on hand. So the gravity of this is probably going to come out just a little bit higher than what you would expect from malted barley. I put this inside the Dutch oven that I'm going to use for the boil and strained into that. I was trying to keep from making too much of a mess in the kitchen. So here I'm straining out the mash of heather tips and using it to liquefy the liquid malt extract and get it all into the Dutch oven, which will go back onto the burner. And then I'm adding heather tips and elderflowers to that. It will quickly come up to a boil, and then we're going to boil that for 1 hour. At the 1 hour mark, dunk that into an ice bath. Our goal is to bring this down to close to room temperature as fast as possible. Once that got down to just above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, I felt like it was an okay time to Add a Campden tablet. And strain it into the fermentation vessel. Carefully now. I had to stop partway through and dump some of the herbs out. And then add cold spring water. Shake, shake, shake. And this is going to be fermenting open for about a week underneath a paper towel. And then I will switch to a silicone bung for the remainder of the fermentation. So in 24 hours, once that Campden tablet has done its thing, we will add the yeast. 24 hours later, we will pop the top. And in that angelic afternoon sunlight, we will pitch our yeast. And I will point out that I neglected to take a starting gravity because of all of the herbs in there. It would have been too difficult for me to read it at this point. So I ran it through an online beer calculator and it should have been about 1.1. I'm not going to concern myself with gravity though, because I'm just trying to follow this recipe. Here it is about a week later with the cap on top. Consistently it forms that cap, so you don't have to shake it up every day or so. And we're going to let this ferment out dry. And we'll do an update video when we rack this to secondary and eventually bottle. Thanks for stopping by. Please follow us on Instagram and Pinterest, and we'll see you next time.